Welcome to my series about the iconic synth ARP 2600. And don't worry, I'm not going to talk about how important the synth it was, or still is, and how many famous musicians and who used it in their work. There are enough videos about this matter on YouTube. I'm rather going to analyze patches, certain patches. The patches drafted in ARP's 2600 Patchbook, released in the early 1970s and reissued as a PDF file by Korg in 2020. And by doing so, I take you on a journey not only through the whole synth, but also through the history of electronic music. I think that analyzing patches and presets is a more enjoyable, but nevertheless profound way to learn the details of a synth, more enjoyable than reading the manual at last. Let's begin then, and let's begin quite basic. Trumpet and French horn, that's the name of the first patch I'm going to talk about. It's patch number 2 in the Patchbook. There's only one single patch cable needed, and I'm going to make even this single patch cable redundant in the route of the analysis. The idea of the patch is mixing the sound of a trumpet with the sound of a French horn by adjusting the influence of the ADSR envelope generator on the filter, the VCF. Adding a bit of reverb to the patch emphasizes those frequencies in the spectrum which are more typical for French horns than for trumpets. Okay, so far the idea, now for the practical part. The basic waveform for both trumpet, as well as the French horn is a saw wave. Oscillator 3 delivers a saw wave by default. So I go to the mixer in the filter section and let the sound of oscillator 3 in. Please notice that the VCA slider is down in the output mixer and the VCF slider is turned up instead. I bridge the VCA this way, and I do so because I don't want to apply an envelope, neither an ADSR nor an AR envelope, to the VCA, the amplifier, yet. And without any envelope, the VCA doesn't let any sound through. But back to my saw wave and the filter. I have a trumpet-like sound at the moment. Well, a trumpet-like spectrum, to be precise. For the sound getting more similar to that of a trumpet, I need to give it a trumpet-like envelope. A volume envelope as well as a filter envelope. And I'm going to form both envelopes in one single step in a while. Just be patient for a minute. But the French horn first. The French horn has got a quite limited amount of partials at the higher end of the spectrum. To make the sound resemble a French horn, I must close the low-pass filter remarkably. Well, let me do so. With a 24 dB low-pass filter cut off at around 1 kHz, I'm going to reduce it further later, I'm happy with my synthetic French horn for the moment. The envelope now. I close the VCF slider in the output mixer and open the ADSR slider in the filter section instead. Hitting a key on my keyboard, I don't hear anything, even if the sustain slider of the ADSR is nearly at maximum. Well, I cannot hear anything because both sliders in the audio output mixer are closed. No input from the VCF, nor one from the VCA. But there is a third input jack in the output mixer, a jack called mixer out, leading to the reverb unit. I patch the filter's output in this jack and open the left and right reverb sliders a bit, and voila, I get sound, and hitting some keys on my keyboard I can hear even a bit of envelope. How is that? Well, with my patch cable I have simply bridged the VCA, the amplifier again. The difference to the situation before, when I had the VCA slider and the output mixer open, is the influence of the ADSR on the cutoff frequency of the filter, the VCF. Well, let's shape a filter curve now. First of all, I reduce the sustain as well as the filter's cutoff frequency a little bit further, because I want a sound only when I hit a key. With the high sustain I have at the moment, the filter is always open enough to let sound through. Then I add a bit of attack and even some release, set the decay, the time the filter needs to go from maximum back to the sustain level, equal to the sustain level, slider of course, and I'm done with the patch. That's it. With the ADSR slider in the filter section, I can change between the pure sound of a French horn and the combination of a French horn and a trumpet. Let me mess around with it a bit. The ADSR envelope serves as both here, as I promised. It closes the filter, and by doing this, down to very low frequencies, where there are nearly no partials in the spectrum anymore, it silences even the whole sound. Well, so far the original patch from the Patchbook. But what if I didn't want any reverb? The reverb sliders have got a double function in this patch. They don't only set the amount of reverb, but also the overall volume. No reverb at all means no sound at all. By patching the VCF's output directly to the mixer out, to the mixer out jack, I have not only bridged the VCA, but also the output mixer itself, and have fed the the VCF's sound directly to the reverb unit, misusing it as a volume regulator. Well, let me modify the patch now. I want a sound, more or less the same one, but without reverb. But I still want the possibility to change between the mixed sound, trumpet plus French horn, and the pure sound of a French horn by using the ADSR slider in the filter section. Well, let's go for it then. I remove the patch cable then, set the reverb sliders back to 0, open the VCF slider in the output mixer, and I'm back home again. Or I fade out the VCF and fade in the VCA slider in the output mixer, feed the sound from the VCF into the VCA by opening the VCF slider there in the VCA, and use the attack release envelope, the AR envelope, to open and close the VCA with every hit on the keyboard. I could also use the ADSR for opening and closing the VCA, but using the AR, attack release, instead, I could give the volume a different attack and a different release than that of the filter's cutoff frequency. Let me show this with the release of the AR envelope generator. Alright, another original ARP 2600 patch now. It's called Prancing Raindrops, and it's patch number 76 in the original ARP 2600 patchbook. We need the ring modulator as well as the sample and hold unit in this patch, and as not all of you may be familiar with these units, some short explanations first. The ring modulator takes the two incoming frequencies and gives out the sum and the difference of these frequencies. The two original frequencies are not part of the output spectrum anymore. The ARP's ring modulator takes the saw wave from oscillator 1 and the sine wave from oscillator 2 as its inputs by default. To start with an easier to observe example, I patch the sine wave from oscillator 3 to the left input of the ring modulator. We have two sine waves now and should easily see their sum and their difference at the ring modulator's output, which I fade in the VCF mixer. To see and hear even the original two frequencies, I use the two corresponding oscillator sliders in the VCF mixer section. Another important thing to know is which input of the ring modulator is the modulated one and which is the modulating one. Sliding down input 2, the right one, the ring modulator delivers the unmodulated wave at input 1, the left one. Input 1 is the modulated input and input 2 is the modulator, the modulating one. Sliding down input 1 leads to silence. Nothing there to modulate means no sound at all. When we use other than sine waves, the modulation concerns all particles or all partials in the spectrum. With two saw waves, for example, one modulated and one modulating, we get a quite powerful saw wave sound at the output therefore. And if we want to make it even more impressive, we add the two original frequencies to the mix. The sample and hold unit now. Well, whereas the ring modulator delivers audio, the sample and hold unit delivers control voltage, signals to control, for example, the pitch of a VCO. I fade the keyboard CV of oscillator 1 down and fade in the sample and hold control instead. I get random pitches, and with the LVL, the level slider of the sample and hold unit, I set the width, the range of the pitch changes, whereas the rate slider sets the rate of generating a new random pitch. How does this unit work internally? Well, it takes the value of the voltage of its input signal at a certain time and sends this voltage to its output. As long as no new value is taken from the input signal, the unit holds the sampled voltage unchanged. How often the unit takes new samples of the voltage at its input is determined by the rate slider, as I told you. By default, the sample and hold unit takes its input, the source it samples from the noise generator, and as noise generates a huge amount of fast-changing random voltages, we get those random sequences we have heard a minute ago. We can also generate more regular sequences with the sample and hold unit when we use, for example, a saw wave as its input. There are more details concerning this special sample and hold unit of the ARP 2600, but I leave them to a later video when we need to know them for the patch we are talking about then. For today's patch, we don't need to know more than the basics of the unit. Alright, patch number 76, Prancing Raindrops now. The signal flow is more complex than you may think when looking at the patch the first time. For example, the sample and hold unit modulates VCO2 together with VCO1, but all sliders in the VCF mixer are down. How does the sound from VCO2 come to the output then? Why modulating a sound source that is blocked from the output? Or what about this? The ADSR slider in the VCA mixer is up, but there is no keyboard gate signal needed. The raindrops keep falling even without me having to touch my keyboard. So, how can the ADSR have any influence? And why is the pitch of VCO2 modulated by a square wave Modulating an audio signal by a square wave at audio rate always leads to sharp and harsh snapping and cracking and other kind of edgy, glitchy noises, which we, interesting enough, don't hear in the sound of this patch. The second riddle is the easiest to solve. The AR envelope is triggered by the internal clock of the sample and hold unit because the trigger switch is switched down from keyboard gate to trigger, and the trigger in jack is fed by the sample and hold by default. So the AR is triggered by the rate of the sample and hold, or at the rate of the sample and hold unit, and the AR itself sets the ADSR envelope in action. Now for the mystery of the second oscillator of VCO2. Okay, VCO2 is modulated by the sample and hold unit and by VCO1. I'll talk about the square wave thing in some minutes. Where does the output of VCO2 go? It's not the chain VCF to VCA to output. No, the real chain reads VCO2 to the ring modulator, where it serves as the modulating frequency. From there, the modulated VCO1 goes to the VCA, and from there to the output of the synth. Well, through the reverb unit in the end. And with that said, I have answered the third question too. The square wave of VCO1 doesn't modulate the pitch, does not modulate the pitch of anything that reaches the audio output of the synth, but modulates the ring modulating frequency of VCO2. The rest of the patch is easy to grasp now. Changing the frequency of VCO3 leads to slightly different patterns, because the saw wave of this VCO3 is the source which the sample and hold unit takes its samples from, and changing the source saw wave without changing the sample rate lets the sample and hold unit take its voltage from different stages of the saw wave's cycle. The frequency of VCO1 sets the speed of the whole pattern, because it is the VCO2 modulating square wave of VCO1, which sets the speed of frequency changes of VCO2, which itself causes changes of the pitch of the output of the ring modulator at the same frequency. Well, and the sample and hold rate sets, of course, the speed of the raindrops. Thank you for watching. And now hurry up to my website www.rofilm-media.net to subscribe to my newsletter service there. Or do you rather stay the last to be informed of what's going on at my channels and in the Rofilm-Media.net community? No, you surely don't. Ah, yes, and of course, don't you dare not to subscribe to my channel here and click on the bell down there to turn notifications on. Yay. And having done all this, you can relax and enjoy your day. Thank you. Arf.